The general welfare. That was the question on one of your quizzes, I think. The general welfare of the American people. We have people forming political parties, right? The Populist Party. We have the Grange Movement. And we have all of these groups that are trying to ask the government to rein in big business and to take care of the American people, to bust up monopolies, to add silver, take more care of America. Well, he had all that stuff going on in the Gilded Age, but it wasn't terribly successful. You know, they got a few people appointed to political positions, the People's Party did, and so forth. But when we turn the corner into the 20th century, that begins to come to fruition. Did anybody else want a donut? I got tons of donuts over here. No? You put it in your pocket, take it home with you? No, all right. So, this era, say basically the first 2 decades of the 20th century, is known as the Progressive Era. It's when we begin to see a lot of government legislation to take better care of the country, to take better care of the people, to limit the scope of big business, all that good stuff. The reason it's so specific, I mean, why wouldn't you just say 1920? Why would this stop in 1917? What momentous event happens in 1917?
U.S. joins World War I?
Yeah, we went into World War I, the Russians have a revolution, Red Scare starts, and then we quit worrying so much about these kinds of laws. Would it be easier to set that on something?
No, this is fine.
I hate for you to have to hold that the whole time.
Yeah, it's okay.
You good? All right. So, what?
Why were we quitting?
Well, I was going to do it so people could go on a field trip this morning, because I had heard from Mr. Ostroff yesterday that some people had decided not to go on a field trip because they didn't want to miss AP. But then I also heard this morning that they were going to have to miss third period too, and they just didn't want to do that. So anyway, and I wrote Alex and asked if he would record it this morning and put it on YouTube. But since we had people missing first period and this period, might as well go ahead and record it since he's got the camera. So I'll do something nice for, I'll buy you a car or something. All right, so we began to see a lot of change in this time period. So we're going to, we're going to, in later chapters, talk about politics and other stuff, but this chapter is about the progressive nature of these first 2 decades. Some of it's political, some social, and then we're going to come back and talk about other stuff that's happening during this time frame. So the Progressive Era. There's nothing up here I need you to specifically know other than to know that people have just been asking the government for a long time to do something better, all right? So there are 4 key terms. If I got a question on the AP exam about the Progressive Era, I would put every single one of these words into a thesis statement. Democracy, more democracy, all right? More opportunities for the common man to nominate people and that kind of thing. More efficiency, government, more efficiency in business, more regulation of business, and social justice, to go the other way from social Darwinism, social justice, reform Darwinism, that kind of stuff. So those are the 4 keys there, and we're going to look at each of those individually here in a second. I had mentioned a term to you guys earlier that this was a time prior, during the Gilded Age, of wanting the government to provide for the general welfare. This is a great way to say that with another set of words, with a different term. To elevate the public interest. For the government to consider the people more than they had in the past. Less about keeping big business happy, more about keeping the majority of Americans happy. So, providing for the general welfare. In other words, just do good stuff. Let's help the farmers. Let's help them keep their farms. Let's make it easier to borrow money. Let's make it easier to get more currency. Let's make sure we don't have 3 feet of manure in New York City so that babies are dying at a rate of 3 out of 5 in 1 year. Provide for the general welfare of the American people. All right, moving on. Good DBQ type of illustration here. Down here it says, our New York Board of Health. Everybody on the board's taking a nap. And in the meantime, we got horses being killed, we've got the Russian plague, we've got Irish people going on strike, We got a street cleaning contract that hasn't been signed. In other words, all these people that got jobs as a result of the spoil system because they knew somebody or they were related to somebody, what they're saying is, let's get rid of these kind of people and let's make sure people know how to do their jobs, AKA Pendleton Civil Service Act, right? That kind of stuff. All right, so why did we have a progressive era? All the stuff we've talked about in the last couple of chapters, right? All the problems with our growing cities, with big factories where people are having problems with their health, their dangers. We got little kids working 12 hours a day. All those are the basic reason we have a progressive era, and we need to improve the way that we're providing for the American people. So I'm saying a lot of the same things here in these first few pages. So how did that come about? In addition to farmers getting together and the People's Party, the populist movement and all that kind of stuff, we began to see a couple of different types of people really focusing on reform. The mugwumps, remember that from Barron's, right? So I'm not going to get into that. People who thought that our civil service exams should be in place for people to get jobs and so forth. And then coming down here, the muckrakers, right? Journalists who were looking to expose corruption in business and government. The term muckraker was made popular by Teddy Roosevelt. He had read a book called Pilgrim's Progress. I don't care if you know this, frankly. But Roosevelt began to use the word muckraker. And so you guys know what the slang term muck is. It applies to just kind of a nasty substance somewhere. And muckraking's talking about going through all the corruption, the nastiness, the muck and mire is usually two words you hear together, and seeing what's causing it. What is it that's causing all these problems? So there are a couple of books of which you should be aware. Now, you got some of the books in Barron's, like Jacob Riis, whose name is here toward the bottom of the page, right? There's a couple that you didn't get, I don't believe. You ought to know Henry Demarest Lloyd. He wrote a real scathing commentary on Standard Oil and the whole vertical integration and running people out of business, but also on a number of other companies. And he wrote one book in particular called Wealth Against Commonwealth. The title of that book pretty much tells you what that book's about. Not wealth in hand with the Commonwealth, wealth against Commonwealth. In other words, that the needs of a few wealthy people at the top of the economic food chain had been taking priority over the good of the American people.
I think someone's calling me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've got any graduation calls I need to take. All right. So, does that make you feel good? I'm like, oh, heck, with graduation's not really that important. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get people on stage this year. I didn't have room for another chair last year, and yet we've got 7 more seniors this year.
How many people in the senior class?
So I'm going to have to rig some kind of a trapeze thing. It's 85, I think.
Is their class bigger than our class?
And they get 7 more reserved seats per family, and I was almost out of chairs under the tent. People are going to be standing around. I don't know what we're going to do. We need to build a new theater really quickly. Really big one.
I second that motion.
Okay, so Wealth Against Commonwealth, Henry Demarest Lloyd. Lincoln Steffens is another one. He was the one that wrote a book that was exposing the political machine system that we had in place, the bosses, political machines, called The Shame of the Cities. All right, that's a beautiful title for what's happening in corporate America. In political America in the urban areas. Jacob Riis, we've already talked about him, how the other half lives. He had all those photographs of how poor people were living, and that brought attention to a lot. We even had a magazine that was dedicated to muckraking, called McClure's. I won't ask you that on a test. So the bottom line is we have people who are making it their career to go out and to try, I'm sorry, I'm used to moving around. But, okay, I'll try and stand here. That are making it a career out of exposing this kind of scandal and suggesting how we might make this a better country. So here's the 4 things I mentioned back about 10 minutes ago. Democracy, efficiency, regulation, and social justice. Let me give you a few examples of each of these, and then over the next couple of chapters, we're going to get into a little more detail on some of these. So under democracy, we already had a democracy. Was it a complete democracy? Not really, because the people couldn't really nominate candidates for office. Does anybody remember the Compromise of 1877? Does anybody remember what the committee did?
Oh, they gave Hayes all the votes.
They took like 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and 1
Independent.
One independent guy. Now we had some congressmen, we had some senators, well, we had some House of Representatives people, we had some senators, and one guy that really wanted to be a senator. And they said, we can arrange for that to happen, because it's the party leaders that actually, they're calling back again, that may be an emergency of some sort. Party leaders that can nominate someone to be a national senator, a federal senator, whatever. The people couldn't do that. And so now people are demanding a direct primary. A primary is where you determine who your candidates are going to be. And they're saying we need to allow people to directly elect people for federal office. Because before it was just these conventions of political leaders, right? Back then, for instance, let's say the members of our state senate down in Austin would be contributing to saying who could run for national senator in Texas, right? Not you and me, we couldn't do that. So the direct primary. And then we have some words that do a really nice job of defining themselves. Other things that people want. The initiative. This dates back even to colonial times. Remember, only governors could initiate legislation? People are saying that the everyday man or woman should be able to initiate a law, to propose a law, for Congress to debate, and then for people to vote on. That's called the initiative. Initiate legislation, initiate laws, all right, get it started. And then after you've initiated one, and it's being debated, if Congress decides it's worthy of that, then you refer it to the people, known as the referendum. When you guys get old enough to vote, you're going to be asked to vote yes or no on all kinds of referendums. About every year, several little towns around Fort Worth that are dry communities, they don't sell alcohol, will have an alcohol referendum, and the people go vote. We'll have a referendum on whether or not people want to pay an extra tax so we can have a really nice ballpark in Arlington, right? They had that referendum. Bless you. Needed some Kleenex?
Yes. I don't touch pots.
After the referendum, there's the term recall. We had a lot of people in office that turned out to be not very good people, right? And so they've got this in place, they put it in place, where you can recall elected officials. This has happened in your lifetime. About 7 or 8 years ago, the governor of Wisconsin was recalled. He lost his job. About 10 years ago, the governor of California lost his job. They kicked him out. It's like it being impeached, right? So you can get people out of office. They weren't guaranteed to be able to serve their terms. And then something that really doesn't happen until Woodrow Wilson's president, but I want to mention it now, the direct election of senators. In other words, like the direct primary, the people themselves get to vote on who's going to be their elected official, their representative in Congress. Directly from the people. Everybody gets to vote, not just the political leaders of each party. So we're beginning to see these things over the next couple of decades. All right, so that's democracy. Under efficiency. Guys, we've got huge businesses, we got huge factories, people are getting hurt, children are working long hours, we've got governments that are top-heavy with spoils system people, right, that aren't doing their job. And a guy by the name of Frederick Taylor, who I believe was actually in Barron's, I'm not sure. Oh no, it was in one of the videos we watched. Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, or Taylorism, I don't really care if you remember his name, something you could probably use on an essay. But he began to say, we need to do things better. We need to streamline things. We need to be better in business. We need to be better in government. And as a result, of people, am I going too fast? You guys have the notes, right? Everybody was able to
The
access
internet's
them?
down again though.
Oh, it is? All right, so I'll move a little slower.
It's okay. I'm fine. I'll just.
All right. So, basically what he's saying is, instead of getting people that aren't qualified, here we go back to the education, PhDs, all that kind of stuff. We need to hire people that know what the heck they're doing in business and in government so that we can make it more effective financially, that we can be more successful with what we're trying to accomplish. And as a result, we end up with a change in the way we do city politics. We're getting away from political machines and bosses. And I'm not gonna, in years past, I've asked my students to know both of these. They're pretty much the same thing. But something happened in Galveston, Texas in 1900, right? Not 1901, that was 1900. But have y'all ever heard about the big hurricane in Galveston? It lifted Galveston off of the planet, well, off the continent, and put it into the water. I mean, there was nothing left.
Wasn't it 1915?
No, it was 1900 or 1901. They might have had another one in 1915, but the really big one, it erased Galveston. And so people are pointing fingers. Well, you were in charge of this and that, and you should have said we needed a better seawall. Right? Y'all know what a seawall is? Okay. Or we should have a better irrigation system. You know, like in New Orleans, when that hurricane flooded New Orleans, they started blaming the Army Corps of Engineers because their viaduct system wasn't able to hold enough water to get it out of the city and so forth. So what happens is, instead of having the spoil system in government, we start having what's known as the commission system or the city manager system. Fort Worth operates under the city manager system, but again, they're very similar, so I'm not going to really get into the differences. In the city manager system, there's a manager between the mayor and the city council. All right, and then various departments. So let me show you how this works. All right, so we got a mayor who's the figurehead in the city, right? Bless you. I really like the commitment to that sneeze. Achoo! A little harmony there. All right, so this is a city, and we got the mayor who's kind of in charge of the city. He goes to the lunches and whatever, gets in on city council meetings. But we have a city council, right, that are elected officials. All of you live in a particular neighborhood if you're in Fort Worth, and you have a city councilman who gets elected if people go out and vote for him. And they represent you. I call my city councilman up and say, Jim, we got a huge pothole out in front of my house. Not happy about it. If you don't arrange for that to get fixed, I'm not voting for you next time. They're your representative to the government. But there's also a commission to run the city. What are the various departments that it takes to run a city?
Fire department.
Water.
Okay, so you've got a fire department, you gotta have a water department,
The police. Trash.
police, you gotta have a
Power.
waste disposal department, you gotta have a parks and recreation, you gotta have a sewer, which is sometimes tied to water, but not usually. You got all these different organizations. These people have degrees in here. We don't have some guy in charge of the fire department who's Uncle Billy, who's never even seen a fire. We got somebody who knows about how fires start, how they spread, how you put them out, and that kind of stuff. So this is what begins to happen in the municipalities across America. We have a more organized system, more professionals, all that part of the efficiency part of this. Down to regulation. We're going to talk a lot about regulation later, so I'm just going to mention it since it's one of those 4 items we talked about at the beginning. We already had the Sherman Antitrust Act that was passed back in 1889 or whenever it was. That wasn't terribly effective, but there's a great illustration here. I made it bigger this morning. Oh, well, I just downloaded it, so you probably got the bigger version. Let me turn off the light so you can have a better look at it. I love political cartoons. So you have a ship full of pirates. They're not regular pirates. It's corporate America, right? The trusts. And Uncle Sam is walking the plank. And the point here is pretty obvious, right? That big business is stepping on the American flag. They're taking the flag down. It doesn't belong to America. It doesn't belong to people anymore. It belongs to big business. And they're saying exactly that big business is taking over America. And they're the only ones whose opinions count. They're the ones that are able to buy congressmen, And so that's one of the reasons that we begin to see a lot more attention given to regulation of big business, getting away from a laissez-faire government and regulating big business with various antitrust acts. And we have some more besides the Sherman Antitrust Act that are going to be coming up. And then finally, social justice. We talked about this in the last chapter, guys. When we talk about social Darwinism, let the poor fall by the wayside, followed by reform Darwinism and the social gospel, we have that continue. Social justice, where we've got to take care of people. How is it that we have children working 12 hours a day in a textile mill? All right? How did that happen? Shouldn't we have a law against child abuse, right? Sweatshops, you've heard about them. We should have laws against alcohol. A lot of people are saying we've been talking about that ever since the 1830s, right? I'm not going to ask you about the National Child Labor Committee, but we have a government agency designed to look into the affairs of child labor. We have, this has gotten a little, I moved this earlier this morning, some things aren't lined up. Here you have this could be on a DBQ. You got a kid sitting at a sewing machine, it's 8 o'clock in the background. That's not 8 a.m., right? It's the evening, and this kid's sitting here working, probably not going to school, not getting an education. They're beginning to realize that women are also working the same hours as men, and they think, you know what, women have to be mothers as well. So Mueller versus Oregon, I do want you to know, it's a really important Supreme Court case. Limited working hours for women. Women who were family women who had children. Prohibition, we've already talked about, so I'm not going to mention these. We've already talked about the Women's Christian Temperance Union, whatever. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. That's going to happen when we get to 19, right? So let's talk about the presidents who were involved in the progressive era. 1900 to 1917. Roosevelt became president in 1901 when McKinley was assassinated, right? September 1901. It would be nice if you could remember who the presidents were in the progressive era. And what's interesting about this is that Republican presidents took a real bad rap in the Gilded Age for being tied to big business and not interested in regulating big business. However, 2 of the 3 presidents in the progressive era were Republican presidents. And the first one was Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a no-nonsense guy that believed that everybody should be heard, everybody should be treated fairly in America. He wasn't taken in by big business and just given a lot of money and playing by their rules only. The most activist president since Lincoln. So we have now passed all the forgotten presidents, and we're getting back to presidents that people remember and people celebrate for the things they did. Theodore Roosevelt was one of those. Trying to find a balance between a government that was too small, laissez-faire, and a government that was so big it borders on socialism. Right? Trying to find a balance in there. And this ends up actually in FDR's New Deal programs in the 1930s. That's really the high point of the progressive era, even though the progressive era officially ended in 1917. It picks up again in 1930. So, you should know this term. Almost every president is, well, that's not fair to say. A lot of our presidents are remembered by the 2-word terms that they use to define their outlook on American politics. He said, I want a square deal. A square is even on every side, and I think we need to be equally fair to the people of America. I think we need to be fair to business and allow them to operate and make a profit. Everything's got to be fair. So he went to work breaking up some of the biggest monopolies and trusts in America. The one he's most famous for breaking up initially was the Northern Securities Company. This was a trust that owned and operated a large number of railroads. J.P. Morgan. By the way, the people who own these big businesses were kind of shocked that this was happening. Well, Roosevelt's a Republican. He's one of us. Well, what the heck's going on? Well, he's breaking you up. That's what's going on. You see here that he filed 25 antitrust lawsuits. 25. Swift and Armor was another one in addition to Northern Securities. Y'all remember who Swift was, or Armor? The guys that, remember when we had the open range out west and people were raising cows and selling steaks and whatever? I told you we had a Swift. There's still a company down there in the stockyards, right? Still says Swift carved into the stone on the front. Yeah. So the beef trust. So anyway, he goes to work doing that. I'm going to give you one good example of how he had a square deal for labor and business. There was a coal strike in 1902. It was right after he took office. And the coal industry is a rough deal. If you guys watch TV, and at least once every 2 years, you're going to see a coal mine that caves in West Virginia or Virginia. And people are going to get trapped and they're going to die, right? The coal mining business has been real controversial from the very beginning because it's extremely dangerous. And the coal miners out in Virginia and Pennsylvania and that area, they wanted more money, 20% more money. They wanted to work fewer hours down in those coal mines, getting black lung. You always see these miners that had bandanas tied across their face because all that coal dust would get into their lungs and kill them. And they wanted their union to be recognized. Guys, if a business doesn't recognize the union, that means they won't do what kind of bargaining? Collective bargaining, right? They'll only deal with an employee one-on-one. And so they go on strike. The coal mine owners say, don't care, we got loads of money. You're going to fold long before we do. So as the year goes by, there's a severe shortage of coal in America, and Roosevelt's thinking it's going to be winter before long, and we're not going to have enough coal to keep people in the Northeast and along the northern borders warm. So he calls both sides to Washington. The coal mine owners and the union representatives said, can you guys work this out? Nope. Left them together for a while, got involved. Nope, not giving an inch. Not going to give an inch. And so Roosevelt, remember Walk Softly, Carry a Big Stick, Roosevelt, larger than life? He says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to have our government take over the mines. And the coal miners said, the owners said, you can't do that. And his lawyer said, Mr. President, that's unconstitutional. He said, to hell with the Constitution. People in America need coal. Right? Now, he couldn't have done that, but he was threatening to do it, and he got them to come to a square deal. They came about halfway, right? They got a 9-hour workday instead of an 8-hour workday. They got 10% increase instead of 20, and no union recognition. So it was about a 50-50 deal. He was fair to the owners, and he was fair to the miners. And that's just the kind of guy he was. And under Roosevelt, and guys, there's a lot of stuff here that I'm going to not ask you to know because it's just going to get burdensome, and we've got so much to cover. And by the way, all year I have not made assignments more than a day or two in advance, and there's a reason for that. It's because classes go at different paces, and some days we get to talking about something and we'll go slow or whatever. I don't want to change the syllabus every other day, and so I kind of just go with the flow. But we're out of time. We're getting close to being out of time. We had all the snow days, and so I'm going to start giving you guys assignments a week in advance. You can see that they're coming, and we really need to stay on the schedule that I'm going to set out there. And if we're not able to do that in class, then it's going to involve some textbook reading. And we're going to do some Barron's and some A-Push review as well over the next 4 weeks. We'll meet here at 10 o'clock Saturday if anybody wants to come. Okay? All right. Now back up here. Government has to get bigger if you're going to regulate. You need more. You need the Interstate Commerce Commission. You need other departments to oversee the commerce of the United States. So, Department of Commerce, new agencies being created under Roosevelt. The one I really want you to remember the most is the Bureau of Corporations, to oversee corporate America. Interstate. Now remember, the government can only regulate interstate businesses. Right. So that's all I'm going to ask you to know on this page. The Elkins Act was kind of a big deal, but not that big a deal. It's not in the concept outline. So let's get to Roosevelt's second term. He finished out his first term, or McKinley's term, 1904, we have another election. Roosevelt gets elected, and what's interesting about this election is that a lot of people in big business in the Republican Party put a lot of money into Roosevelt's campaign because they did not want the Democrat, Alton Parker. I don't remember him, I don't expect you to. I couldn't tell you who his opponent was if my mother's life depended on it. So please don't feel like you need to know that. I never remember Alton Parker. But a lot of people, even J.P. Morgan, remember Roosevelt broke up Morgan's business, the Northern Securities, right? Even Morgan put money into it. He said because Roosevelt, he's a Republican, so regardless of what's happening, it's got to be better than what the Democrats are going to do to us in terms of regulation. And so Roosevelt wins overwhelmingly. He had a lot of people from the Democratic Party voting for him because they appreciated what he was doing. And I want you to look at this quote down here. After he starts his second term, he continued to regulate big business. And Henry Frick, Carnegie's right-hand man from the Homestead strike, said, wait a minute, we bought the son of a bitch and he didn't stay put. In other words, we paid for his presidency and he's still doing this. What's going on here? He took our money and now he's screwing us around. Because he was determined to be fair to everybody in the country, right? All right. So, pretty important, but I'm not going to ask you guys to know it. The Hepburn Act, if they had mentioned it in the concept outline, I might, yeah. But anyway, the bottom line is it gives more power to the ICC. So, more regulation. And now let's get down here to the meat industry. We've already seen the railroad industry with Northern Securities. We've seen, we talked about breaking up Swift and Company. But let's talk about the meat industry for a bit because that was a big deal during Roosevelt. Has anybody in here ever read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle? It's a little bit of an overrated book. It used to be required reading when I was in high school. Upton Sinclair was writing about conditions in the meatpacking plants up in Chicago and up in the Midwest and just how bad they were. And when his revelations were made public, people just started throwing up all over the country. Excuse me? You saw rat feces just being kind of into the meat. Nobody cared about it. People were getting their fingers chopped off with these machines and it was going into my hot dog. Yeah. I talked about how bad these conditions were for the laborers and how unfit this food was for human consumption. Now, even now, there's a certain amount of rat hair that's allowed to be in your hot dog. There's a certain amount of fecal matter that's allowed to be in your hot dog because it's impossible to have 100% clean anything anywhere, unless I guess you're in some kind of a scientific laboratory and everybody's wearing a suit. Now, it's like 1 part per million, and you probably get that at home. All right, maybe not, but.
Maybe not rat hair, but.
Yeah, you never know. But I mean, you might get stuff from the store, you know. So you go out and you get the best, the very best type of hamburger, you know, from Chuck or sirloin, ground sirloin or whatever. That doesn't mean that you don't have a little rat hair in there or whatever from where it was packed. But they're allowed to have some because it's impossible to have everything completely clean. That doesn't mean a lot. You're never gonna. But back then, it was really nasty, all right? Rat dung on meat piles and the meats and poison, drop the rats in to help bulk up the meat cells and all that kind of stuff. When Roosevelt read Sinclair's book, 2 things happened on the same day. The Meat Inspection Act of 1906, where the government said, we're going to start looking at the food that's being prepared in America. We're going to have to keep an eye on that. And the other one passed on the same day was the Pure Food and Drug Act. You know, we now have a Food and Drug Administration that watches over stuff to make sure that we're not getting salmonella or whatever, or if it does, it gets recalled immediately, whatever. So in 1906, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. There's a bottom line comment there. Government began to regulate. Government got bigger and it began to get more involved in regulation and less laissez-faire. Okay, and then very quickly, before the bell rings, Roosevelt was the first president to get uber concerned about conservation. You guys remember reading about the Sierra Club and the Crockett, and I can't even remember now what it's called.
The Boone and Crockett.
Boone and Crockett, right? I never heard of that until this year. But he set aside more national parks and monuments than any president up to his time. He wasn't the first one to do it, but he set aside 5 new national parks. He began the National Monument Program. Gifford Pinchot worked for him. Y'all remember that name from Barron's, Gifford Pinchot? Right? He was in charge of the forest division and so forth. Anyway, next time we'll pick up with the transition from Roosevelt to the next president, William Howard Taft. And we will not have a quiz Friday. We will get right into, thank you, Alex, for recording that.